you know, to get any useful information at the briefing is almost impossible. It's very rarely. I mean, this week was one of those rare days when I was actually shocked to see the presentation. It had so much information.
Okay, got it. And on that note, I think we can say we're live on all platforms. So, hello everybody. Vaccine confusion is a real thing. Now, is this because there's too much information, or is it because there's not enough information? Are there any questions we as the media should be asking but are not able to? Let's talk to two people who are in the business of reporting on vaccines and other health related issues. We have Abantika Ghosh, a health reporter at The Print and author of a book that's just been published. It's called Billions Under Lockdown, the inside story of India's fight against COVID-19. And we also have with us Priyanka Pulla, a freelance journalist who covers science and health, and you would have seen her reporting on The Wire, at The Wire, on The Quint, and several other websites and journalistic organizations. Thanks so much, both of you, for joining us.
Yep, happy to be here.
Great. So, Abantika, my first question is to you. As per data from Bloomberg.com's vaccine tracker, USA has delivered something like 116 million vaccines at about 18% of its population. China has done 65 million at about 2.4% of its population. And India has delivered 39 million doses at 1.4% of our population. What do these numbers mean? It seems like India is lagging behind, but is there a way of looking at these numbers that is more helpful?
I don't think there is any way to make these numbers look any better than they look, because actually if you see some of the other numbers, it's worse. I mean, you're looking at the population level data, but population level vaccinations have just started. But if you look at the data of the healthcare workers, for example, we've just completed 2 months of doing that. And we had initially estimated that there are, after the registration, there are 1 crore healthcare workers. Of those in 2 months, and 2 months means that even at a 28-day gap, you have enough time. So it's not like you're not eligible or anything. We have only managed to vaccinate, as I look at the data, healthcare workers, fully vaccinated healthcare workers are 47 lakh 15,173. That is even less than 50% of your target population. And I think, this has been the case with health all the time. We saw some of that get resolved at the peak of the pandemic, when there was much more cohesion in the way center and states worked. But now we are back to that same line about it being a state subject and states doing vaccinations and the center simply saying that, oh, we have told them that please open up for all eligible private sector. Please ensure that vaccinations happen 24/7. But that's easier said than done. Even this Sunday, the last Sunday, so normally around 7 p.m., sometimes later, 9 p.m., there is an update that comes on the day's vaccination. So what came this Sunday basically was that we are not giving out figures because states don't do vaccinations on Sunday. I'm not sure we can still afford to take a weekly break and all of that. So I really don't know any way of looking at this data any favorably than it looks.
Okay. So, I mean, clearly it seems it's pretty clear that there are large efficiency gaps in the rollout of vaccines across India. Priyanka, you've indicated that, you think a lot about stuff like AAFI surveillance, opacity in regulation, quality of the bridging studies, and so on. But, let's first start by taking it vaccine by vaccine. First, there were questions about the dangers of the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine, and we saw several countries pausing them, and now they've resumed rolling them out. Yeah. So where are we at? Is it safe to take?
Yeah, so if I were to sum it all up in one line, yes. I don't think much has changed for the majority of people taking the vaccine. The benefits clearly overweigh the harm, especially in the situation we are now, where we are seeing a second wave in several states. So, the urgent imperative is to step up vaccinations, like vastly if possible. And so, I mean, this is not the time for vaccine hesitancy. I think everybody should go ahead and take any vaccine, the AstraZeneca vaccine. But the important thing to remember is after what happened in Europe, the Indian regulator has certain responsibilities. Because, as you know, initially they saw a certain rare adverse event in a small number of people in several European countries, which is what they started investigating. And the signal was real. There was so this was a very rare adverse event called disseminated intravascular coagulation, and there was something else called cerebral venous sinus thrombosis. Now, this is not normally seen at the rate it was in very young people in Europe. They actually saw certain people experiencing it at a much higher rate. For instance, out of every 1.6 million people who received the vaccine, you would have expected one person to experience this blood clot illness, but Germany saw some 7 people experiencing it. So it was something that definitely ought to have been investigated. It was extremely important to investigate, and it's a really good thing that the European countries did that.
Right.
And their conclusion eventually was that we don't know yet, we don't have enough data if it is related or not. And that's another thing that happens really often in vaccine investigations, right? You cannot say immediately whether a particular adverse event is related, because there could be a number of other factors playing into the whole thing. So this is typically a long-term thing. You're going to investigate it over a period of time, track other people who develop the same illness. But the European Medicines Agency advised that these vaccines come with a warning about signs and symptoms to look for that you might be experiencing this blood clot disease. That's what the AMA advised.
Right.
Now, so this is something our regulator has to be proactive about. They should also include this warning, because even if it is an extremely rare adverse event, even if we do not know whether the link is, a solid link yet, and I'll give you an idea about how rare this is. Out of 20 million people vaccinated in European countries, there were around 23 cases. So for every million vaccinated people, maybe one person might be at risk, and the risk is, fairly high. It actually caused deaths in some people, but it's for that person. But so many people are benefiting from the vaccine, right? It's obviously saving these people from COVID too. So for these rare cases who need to be protected, the Indian regulator first needs to introduce a warning. I think they should do that. The second thing the Indian regulator needs to do is go back and look into the around 2 crore people who received the Covishield vaccine, which is essentially the AstraZeneca vaccine. Go back and look at the adverse events they experienced, see if there is something which matches with the illness seen in Europe, because it is a very specific set of symptoms. There is a sort of contradictory set of symptoms. There are blood clots, but there's also bleeding. So I think it needs a certain amount of sophistication to look for that particular illness's disease. You may miss that disease if the doctor who's treating it is not alert enough. So I believe they need to go back, look through our data, see if these illnesses have occurred. And look at causation in India too, because the Indian population is different from the European population. So we need to do that investigation at our level. We can't really sort of piggyback on what EMA is doing. We need to do the investigation, because ultimately, there are 2 things at stake here. One is that this is a rare disease that can actually affect people badly, although it's extremely rare. And the other thing at stake is vaccine hesitancy, right? We need to see the Indian regulator do something about it. Otherwise, there are going to be all these people sitting and wondering, hey, what if I happen to be this 1 in a million people who may experience this, really scary adverse event? So from both points of view, the Indian the ball is kind of in the Indian regulator's court.
Okay.
I believe there is a fairly big responsibility lies on their shoulders too. But the vaccine
Okay,
is safe. I mean, if you're due to get the vaccine, go and take it. Yeah.
Okay, that's really reassuring because my father has had his first shot and he's going to get his second shot soon. I'm going to come to you, Priyanka, on Covaxin, but first I want to bring in Abantika. Abantika, we're also talking about the narrative around vaccines and how it's difficult to kind of report on the whole issue sometimes, and the narrative that has also been built up by most of the media in India. What are the challenges really around reporting accurately and fairly on India's vaccine rollout? I mean, the reason I ask you is, of course, you mentioned in your book that by day your reporting was first draft of history, and then your writing of the book was the second draft of history, so to speak, right? So, I mean, what are the challenges of reporting accurately and fairly?
Quite major, I would say, because there was in the initial days, we used to have everyday briefings. There was like some communication every day and very little information, which is an art that I think bureaucrats are, very good at. They themselves admit that, talking a lot without actually giving information. But even now, as I was listening to Priyanka, I was actually, tempted to add that one of the reasons why vaccine hesitancy is there and why people are scared is because you've been so reluctant to give out data. You are giving data such as, I think last week it was AEFIs are 0.0002% or something like that of the number of people vaccinated. Covaxin, they said just 311. So what are those AEFIs? Also, more importantly, sources tell us that there have been 71 deaths so far, which is fairly high, but there is no official communication to say, yes, 71 deaths have happened, but this is what happened there. And even when you're saying that these are not causally related, somebody has to take a decision that may affect their lives. So you can't just sit up there and talk down to people and say, I'm saying this is not causally related. It doesn't, not reassure people. You need to say that this is what happened. These were the existing conditions. That kind of communication is completely, it is nil. You talk about AFI and they just clam up. So that is one problem. The second problem is that, even in this weekly briefing, let's say, there is only a fixed number of questions. It's very arbitrary. You can only ask 2 questions, 3 questions. That's it. And even those questions will not be answered. They'll be, something or the other. And the most valid questions would be sort of just, you'll be snubbed, that sort of thing. And also very importantly, information, there is this obsession with presenting positive news. For a very long time in say between May, June to say August, September, for a very long time, we would have daily briefings or daily press releases that would not give out the number of positive cases in the country. It would only say there are so many recoveries. And it is this obsession with positive news also that made us be so hung up on recovery rate as a metric to sort of measure the pandemic. And it was extremely, at one level, it was funny because the way we were presenting it, when we say, for example, 95% people, our recovery rate is 95%. What do you mean? Are you saying that 5% people are dying? That's not true. You have a death rate of 1.4%, and for the other 98 point some percent of people, they don't have an option but to recover. So recovery rate is a metric, all right, and that is more to sort of determine the stage of the pandemic rather than to measure whether people are recovering or not. But we constantly talked about recovery rate, during the pandemic. And even now, we are talking in terms of vaccine doses rather than people vaccinated. So we still don't know, they're saying second dose this many. That is fine. That second dose this many, which means the first dose number that you're giving actually doesn't mean anything.
Okay, can you explain that again? You're saying that if India, for example, claims it's vaccinated 38 or 39 million people, You're saying it's not 38, 39 million people, but
No,
it's
no, we are not
38,
claiming
39 million doses.
No, we are not exactly. We are claiming doses. We are not giving out million people. So that again is, and so when you measure death rate, when you measure cases per million, then you say per million because it makes you look good. Again, that obsession with positive news. So because cases per million makes you look good, you say cases per million. Deaths per million makes you look good, you say deaths per million. Testing per million doesn't make you look good, you don't say it. Vaccinations per million doesn't make you look good, you don't say it. That's how we have always sort of manipulated the narrative in a way which makes there's just one purpose of the communication, and that is to say that India is the best country in the world. So
yes,
I mean,
I have noted. I mean, it's pretty clear that there's this tendency in the media as well to print press releases almost without making any changes and running it. And I'm not talking about independent media organizations, but generally the mainstream media organizations. Priyanka,
can I just add to that? That's also because these are the most detailed press releases from the Ministry of Health that I have ever seen in the 10 years, 12 years that I have been doing health reporting. They are so detailed with very little information, but a lot of words.
Yes. Okay. Got it. Priyanka, you have the other kind of challenge, right? Abantika is based in New Delhi, so she goes to the health ministry. You're, based in Bangalore, so, you get the view from the states, so to speak. Also, I mean, couple these challenges along with all the whole issue of Covaxin, which we haven't yet got to. It was rushed into trials without the benefit of, rushed into rollout without the benefit of the phase 3 trials. What do we know about its efficacy now?
Yeah, so I mean, if you're already aware of the history, basically they skipped the phase 3 trial, which was a really big deal. I mean, I let nobody tell you that it wasn't a big deal because, for a new disease like COVID, when you're developing vaccines for the first time, you have no way of predicting if the vaccine is going to work based on phase 2 studies. That could have happened with another disease where you have something called immune correlates. What you measure, the immunity you measure in phase 2 can actually tell you that it's going to protect against disease in phase 3. That wasn't true with COVID, right? Which is why you needed the phase 3 study. But still, they skipped it for reasons that nobody understands. I mean, there's a lot of speculation that it was about nationalism. So that happened. That, I believe, led to some very valid vaccine hesitancy, right? The reason I say this is because the people who experienced hesitancy were not those who traditionally reject vaccines. They're not people who believe in the MMR autism link. There are people who are responsible with their vaccines, and they were concerned for very good reasons, because why would you take a vaccine which is not effective? Because we know that all vaccines have some side effects, even if they're minor, like 3 days of fever and a splitting headache. The point is, the reason you're willing to put up with those adverse effects is because you believe it will protect you against something worse, which is death. If it doesn't work at all and you don't know that, then why would you expose yourself to anything which can give you even the minorest of adverse effects? It's an irrational decision.
Indeed.
So that happened. And then subsequently, you asked me about what we know now. They published a press release with interim data, which was from basically 43 cases of COVID that occurred in the trial. Now, the end point was 130 events. So what this means is, and they said it's 81% effective, which is a fantastic number, but there are like hundreds of caveats, which is that it's a very uncertain estimate, right? Between the interim estimate and the final estimate, things can change. And there are a lot of other nuances which experts look for, such as whether the vaccine can prevent severe disease, whether it can prevent mild disease, whether it can prevent transmission. None of this data was shared. It was just a press release. And there are many other issues with Covaxin, for instance. The phase 3 trial. There was one of the sites of the phase 3 trial, which was Bhopal. There were major protocol breaches there, which were extremely widely reported in the media. Now, these protocol breaches are not a small deal. Okay, these are not about it was widely reported as the people participating in the trial did not know they were part of it, which sounds like an ethical issue, which you may be tempted to think that it's no more than an ethical issue and you can still go on and calculate the vaccine's efficacy reliably. But that is not true. When you have such wide-scale protocol breaches at one site, it interferes with your data, right? It interferes with your efficacy data and it interferes with your adverse event data. A lot of people pointed this out, but the ICMR and the drug regulator didn't do anything about it. They said there were no breaches, although, there was so much evidence reported in the media. So that to me is stunning, that they just denied it. It's incredible because when that happens, if there are such widespread ethical breaches, the thing to do, and anybody who has conducted clinical research will tell you, is it that you launched an investigation, and if there are people who didn't know they were in the trial or from whom data was not collected properly, you will remove those people from the trial and you will do your calculations of efficacy from the remaining people. That has not happened. So when they announced the interim data, they did not say anything about what they did about the Bhopal issue. So that's like a big question mark in my mind. I would like them to address it when the final efficacy data comes out. So yeah, go ahead.
I can tell there are lots more concerns that might spring to mind, but it seems to be the same case of trying to control the narrative here. Controlling the narrative. Sorry, you were saying?
No, and it's not going to work for them because, ultimately Bharat Biotech wants to export these vaccines to other countries too. Eventually, any company wants it to send it to more stringent regulatory regimes, and I don't think they will get past that bar, right? There are other weaker regulatory regimes which may, do it because they do not have any other options, but it's not a fair thing to do. And, one of the things the health ministry did in trying to justify what happened is that they said, look, Russia and China have approved vaccines based on the phase 2 trial, which was the examples you should not have been taking, right? That shouldn't be your benchmark. Nobody in their right mind would hold them up as they didn't do the right thing, and just because they did it.
I'm glad you brought this up because I don't want to take this any further because we have a time constraint and I want to ask just two more questions to one to each of you. But there is this real tendency to believe this argument. Okay, Russia did this, so why can't we? It is quite a seductive argument, honestly. And because we focus here at Media Buddhi and Boom on media narratives and how misinformation travels, we know that this is not the right way of looking at it, but it really is very difficult to argue against it. That's one of the challenges. Abantika.
No, you're thinking of China and Russia as being these technologically advanced people who are, making vaccines super fast, getting it out when you desperately need it. No, I believe you're putting your population at risk and you're risking substantial vaccine hesitancy, which they are facing, by the way. So China is facing a lot of vaccine and you don't want that here. Completely wrong example. Yeah.
Right. Abantika, back to this question of narrative, but from the focus of, India's global vaccine diplomacy, India has delivered, I think, something like 8 million vaccine doses, if I'm not mistaken. The question is, has India overcommitted? Is there a short and simple answer to this? Really, is it possible to report this easily? Because controlling the narrative within India is one thing, but controlling the narrative when it comes to India's vaccine diplomacy goes into another thing altogether.
Yeah, so I'm looking at the MEA website right now. We have so far exported 5.96 crore doses across the world. And a figure that I find very interesting, we've made much of, how we are the vaccine suppliers to the world and we have helped people and all that. The grant is just 81.25 crore. What we have done is we've commercially sold 341.67 crore doses, and the rest, of course, is COVAX. Now, here's the problem. We have definitely overcommitted because, as we mentioned, it's less than 4 crore doses that we have administered domestically. And between I think the first exports went out somewhere around January 20th. So between January 16th and now, we have administered less than 4 crore. But between January 20th and now, we have exported almost 6 crore doses. That's the kind of ratio that there is. And also, and this commercial aspect is also important, because there is this clamor right now that you should open up vaccinations for all, or at least allow companies who are willing to reopen to buy vaccines for their staff and get them vaccinated irrespective of their age, comorbidities, whatever. And the government has been resisting that on the ground, that this is under emergency use authorization. So emergency use authorization per se is a word that does not appear in the clinical trial, new drugs and clinical trial rules, but we do have an abbreviated approval process, which is what this is. And nowhere does it say that you cannot open it for sales, because in fact, that rule actually talks about post-marketing trials, which means you have to market it to do post-marketing trials. That's, I think, implied. If you cannot open up sales in the country because this is under emergency use authorization, how do you commercially export it? Yes. I think there's a bit of a dichotomy there. That's something that, and officials are not willing to answer that question. I have sent like tons of WhatsApp messages trying to get a sense of what this is, but nobody replies.
Yes, I mean, significant challenges in multiple aspects of India's vaccine rollout. One final question to you, Priyanka. We've had the view from New Delhi, so to speak. What is the view from Bangalore, or reporting from a state perspective like? Because there is this tendency to say, okay, what happens in New Delhi is pan-India, but it's not relevant to this state or that state. I mean, what can you say about the challenges of getting accurate information from states?
Well, there are definitely many state-to-state differences. I mean, massive differences, right? Like, for instance,
right.
I mean, recently I was trying to report on a story on genome sequencing. As always seems to be the issue, and it's getting a bit tiring, but Kerala has a website where they update, their number of genomes sequenced and, latest findings. And they've also been sequencing more proactively than other states, right? They've started before the Indian Consortium for Genome Sequencing was put into place. Whereas in the other states, for instance, in Maharashtra, where there's an ongoing outbreak, and it's extremely important to sequence because everybody is asking whether there's a variant going on there. It's been really, really hard to find information about how many samples have you sent to NCDC to sequence? Have you found anything? Recently there was some news about a double mutation driving, the epidemic in Maharashtra, which was just, I don't know where the news came from. It was from anonymous sources. It was just very confusing news because it did not ring true. You can't, if you start sequencing a month ago, it's very unlikely that you will reach that kind of level of evidence that you can say that the sequence is driving the outbreak. I don't believe that. So there are all these anonymous sources putting out news, whereas you need to have somebody, somebody reliable, not only giving you news, but actually contextualizing the news. You can't just say this double mutation as, you have to explain how many samples did you sequence? Did you find a correlation between a growth in the frequency of these double mutations and increasing cases? There's a lot of science in there which cannot be put out through anonymous people or press releases. Should I really put out a paper? Which is what other countries have done. But so there are differences basically between states, and that's the way the cookie crumbles, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much more we can talk about, but I guess one of the fringe benefits from a very journalistic, very niche point of view, the fringe benefit of this whole terrible pandemic is that everyone knows how difficult it is to do health reporting properly. Perhaps we'll leave it at that. Anyone else watching this, of course, we hope you stay safe, continue to stay safe, especially given that there's a surge in many parts of India. And thank you so much, Abantika and Priyanka, for speaking with us.
Thanks. It was really good to be here.
Thank you.